Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Today, we're going to explore a tragic case. Sarah Callahan, born in 1989, was raised in a middle-class family in Hartford, Connecticut. Her dad, Michael, taught history at a high school while her mom, Elizabeth, was a nurse. Sarah had an older brother, Jason, who was 3 years older. From a young age, Sarah was smart and driven to succeed. She did well in school, especially in English and debate. Her teachers always pointed out how great she was at understanding complex issues and explaining her thoughts clearly. These skills would help her in her future career and in facing the mystery that would change her life forever. But her childhood wasn't easy. When Sarah was 14, her parents went through a tough divorce. This left her with a fear of being betrayed and made her determined to create a stable, loving family of her own. She focused on her studies to cope with the chaos at home. Her hard work paid off when she got into Yale University with a partial scholarship. At Yale, she majored in communications and minored in psychology, curious about how people connect and communicate. During her sophomore year, she met David Thompson at a campus event. David, a senior studying business, was drawn to Sarah's quick wit and kind nature. Their relationship grew quickly, and David's confidence matched Sarah's intelligence and kindness. By the time Sarah graduated, they were already talking about marriage. They got married 2 years later in a beautiful ceremony surrounded by family and friends. After college, Sarah's career in marketing took off. She had a natural gift for understanding people's thinking and creating great campaigns. By 30, she was a marketing executive at a big ad firm in Hartford. Even as her career thrived, Sarah never gave up on her dream of having a family. She and David always wanted kids, but they struggled with infertility. This was a tough time for them emotionally, but it seemed to bring them closer, at least from Sarah's point of view. The early years of their marriage were full of excitement and shared goals. They bought a charming 4-bedroom colonial house, hoping to raise children there. They spent weekends fixing it up, visiting local farmers markets, and hosting dinner parties with friends. David's job as a management consultant meant frequent trips, sometimes for days at a time. At first, Sarah found it hard to be apart from him, but she eventually got used to it. She kept busy with work, yoga, and volunteering at a local animal shelter. When David was home, they cherished their time together, going on romantic weekend getaways or just relaxing at home with a movie and wine. Their friends often said how in love Sarah and David seemed even after years of marriage, outro music playing. They finished each other's sentences, laughed at inside jokes, and always stood together as a team. Many of their friends admired their relationship, but over time, small changes began to show. David's business trips became longer and more frequent. When he was home, he seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone or taking calls. Sarah thought it was just work stress and tried to be patient. The first real red flag came on their 10th wedding anniversary. David, who always made a big deal out of anniversaries, forgot the date completely. He was away on a business trip and didn't call until late that night. When Sarah reminded him, he apologized but seemed distant. This small incident planted doubt in Sarah's mind, though she had no idea how big that doubt would soon grow. The moment that changed Sarah's life happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in April. She had taken a half-day off to get ready for a dinner party they were hosting that weekend. While searching for a serving dish in the guest room closet, she found a shoebox she didn't recognize. Curiosity got the best of her, and she opened it. Inside were things that made her freeze a second cell phone. Some birthday and Father's Day cards addressed to Daddy in a child's handwriting and photos of David with a woman and 2 young children Sarah had never seen before. Sarah's hands shook as she looked through the photos. In them, David looked happy, his arm around a beautiful brunette woman. The 2 children, a boy about 7 and a girl around 5, smiled up at the camera. Several photos showed what looked like a house, not a hotel or vacation spot. Sarah's mind raced. Was this an old relationship David had never mentioned? But the kids seemed too young for that. Then she noticed the most recent Father's Day card was from just last year. With a sinking feeling, Sarah realized the truth she had been trying to ignore. David had another family. In the days that followed, Sarah dug deeper. She turned on the second phone and found it was still active. There were hundreds of texts between David and a woman named Jennifer. They were filled with sweet words and details of everyday family life, talks about school events, doctor's appointments, and family vacations. Each text felt like a stab to Sarah's heart. Using the details from the messages, Sarah searched online. It didn't take long to find Jennifer Lawrence on social media. Her profile was mostly private, but Sarah saw enough to confirm her worst fear. Jennifer had posted check-ins at restaurants in Columbus, Ohio during times when David had said he was on business trips. Jennifer's posts hinted at a happy family, but she was careful not to mention a husband directly. As the reality hit, Sarah was flooded with emotions: shock, betrayal, anger, and deep sadness. The life she thought she had, the husband she thought she knew, had all been built on lies. Sarah spent hours going through David's credit card statements, finding regular charges in Columbus, which he had always brushed off as work expenses. She also found a separate bank account she knew nothing about, with frequent transfers to Jennifer's name. As the night went on, Sarah sat alone in the dark living room, surrounded by proof of David's betrayal. The house that once felt safe now felt tainted. Every happy memory was now in question. She knew she had to make a choice. She confront David right away, call a lawyer, Or reach out to Jennifer? Sarah had no idea this discovery was just the beginning. The choices she'd make in the next few days would set off a series of events with fatal consequences for more than one person. As Sarah kept digging, a clearer picture of David's double life came into view. Jennifer Lawrence, age 34, was a pediatric nurse in Columbus, Ohio. She met David 8 years ago during one of his long work trips to Columbus. Their quick romance led to Jennifer becoming pregnant just a few months later. David, already married to Sarah for 4 years, decided to live a double life instead of coming clean to either woman. He told Jennifer his job required him to spend time between Columbus and Hartford, using it as an excuse for his long absences to keep up the lie. He even bought a small house in a Columbus suburb under an LLC, creating a part-time home for his second family. Their kids, Jacob and Emily, believed David's story about his demanding job. He even told them he was a pilot to explain why he wasn't around much. To Jennifer and the kids, David seemed like a loving family man doing his best despite his busy career. Sarah found herself comparing her life to Jennifer's. While she and David lived in a big, luxurious home, Jennifer and the kids had a smaller, cozier house. Where Sarah and David went to fancy corporate events, Jennifer's social media showed kids' birthday parties, little league games, and family barbecues. The differences between the two lives David led were striking. With Sarah, he was a polished, ambitious executive. Their family photos showed him in tailored suits, attending charity events and going on exotic vacations. But the photos from his life with Jennifer showed a more laid-back David, a man in jeans and t-shirts, building sandcastles and pushing swings at the park. Sarah couldn't help but wonder, was this other life more real than the one she had with him? Was their entire marriage just an act on David's part? The David she knew would never have been satisfied with the simple, quiet life he seemed to live with Jennifer. Or maybe she had never really known him at all. As Sarah uncovered more about David's secret life, her emotions swung between rage, heartbreak, and a strange sense of fascination. She began to wonder about Jennifer. Was she also a victim of David's lies? Or did she know about Sarah the whole time? And then there were the kids, innocent children who had no idea their family life was built on lies. The more Sarah found out, the more she realized this wasn't just about her own betrayal. Confronting David would have bigger consequences. It could tear apart the lives of two kids who had done nothing wrong. This weighed heavily on her, making the decision on what to do next feel unbearable. After days of inner conflict, Sarah knew she couldn't keep living in a lie. She needed answers, and they had to come from David. She chose to confront him on a Friday evening when he was due home from a business trip. The day was tense as she ran through what to say in her mind, picturing his reactions and bracing herself for every possible outcome. At 7 p.m., when David walked through the door, his usual smile quickly faded when he saw Sarah sitting stiffly on the living room couch. The shoebox and the pile of evidence sat on the coffee table in front of her. The color drained from his face, realizing his carefully built world was falling apart. "David, we need to talk," Sarah said, her voice shaking despite trying to stay calm. "I know about Jennifer and the kids. I know everything." For a second, David stood frozen, shock and fear clear on his face. Then, suddenly, he shifted into damage control, walking towards Sarah with hands out as if pleading. He said, "Honey, I can explain. It's not what you think." But Sarah wasn't buying it anymore. Months of doubts, followed by days of facing the truth, had left her hurt and furious. Her anger exploded. Her voice grew louder as she bombarded him with questions. How long had this been going on? How could he betray her like this? Did he ever truly love her, or had their entire marriage been a lie? David's answers were a mess of excuses and apologies. He hadn't meant for this to happen. He felt stuck. He claimed to love both families in different ways. He said he always planned to end things with Jennifer, but then the kids came along. He was sorry, so sorry. As their argument intensified, Sarah noticed David change. His initial regret and panic turned into something colder, more calculating. When Sarah mentioned telling Jennifer the truth, David's voice changed completely. His tone turned sharp and threatening, warning her to think carefully about her next steps. The confrontation ended when David, his face twisted in anger and panic, stormed out of the house. Sarah heard his car start, the engine roaring as he sped out of the driveway. She was left alone in the empty silence of their home, surrounded by the wreckage of their broken life. In the days that followed the confrontation, Sarah felt numb. She wandered through the house in a daze, switching between uncontrollable crying and eerie moments of calm. She called in sick and spent days lost in a fog, barely eating or sleeping, replaying the argument again and again. David didn't come home. At first, Sarah thought he had gone to Jennifer to warn her, or maybe he had finally chosen his other family over her. But as days passed with no word from David, no activity on their joint credit cards, and no calls from his main phone, a new worry began to creep in. Where was David? What was he planning? The man Sarah had confronted wasn't the David she thought she knew, and now she had no idea what he was capable of. The longer the silence stretched, the more fear took hold. She hadn't told anyone about her discovery or the confrontation. Now, with David missing and her world unraveling, she realized she was holding on to a secret that was too big, too dangerous to keep to herself. Little did Sarah know that sharing what she knew would set off a series of events far more terrible than she could have imagined. 5 days after their argument, with still no word from David, Sarah finally reached out for help. She called Emma, David's younger sister, the family member she felt closest to, over coffee in a quiet cafe, Sarah poured out the whole story. Emma's face went pale as she listened. Horrified by the extent of David's deception, her shock quickly turned into action. Emma believed David's disappearance was serious and insisted they go to the police. Even though Sarah was hesitant, fearing the public exposure of their private disaster, she agreed. The police took the case seriously, and Detective Michael Lawson, a veteran known for handling complex cases, was put in charge of the investigation. He listened carefully as Sarah explained the events leading up to David's disappearance. The revelation about David's secret family immediately raised red flags for the experienced detective. Jennifer Lawrence, shaken to her core by the news, refused to talk at first. But as the investigation moved forward, she had no choice but to cooperate. In her statement, Jennifer described David as a loving partner and father, a man who had never given her any reason to suspect he had another life. As Detective Lawson dug deeper, more inconsistencies in David's life came to light. Financial records showed large amounts of money being moved around in ways that didn't match his reported income. David's colleagues mentioned that some of his supposed business trips didn't line up with company records. The image of David Thompson as a successful, honest businessman started to fall apart under the weight of the growing evidence of fraud and lies. 2 weeks into the investigation, they got a potential lead when David's car was found abandoned in a parking garage near Bradley International Airport. In the letter, David confessed to his fraudulent activities and expressed deep regret for the pain he had caused both his families. He wrote about feeling trapped, a constant fear of being discovered consuming him for years. The note ended with a chilling line, "By the time you read this, I'll be gone. It's better this way. I'm sorry for everything." The discovery of the note shifted the investigation's direction. Was this a suicide note? Had David taken his own life? And if so, where was his body? Or was this yet another deception designed to mislead investigators while he disappeared to start a new life elsewhere? As the search for David entered a new phase, the consequences of his actions continued to ripple out. Lives had been shattered, fortunes lost, and reputations destroyed. Yet, the full extent of the damage was still unfolding, and the body count was about to rise. 3 months after David's disappearance, the investigation took a dark turn. Simon Reeves, David's colleague who had cooperated with police about inconsistencies in David's work records, was found dead in his home. At first glance, it looked like a tragic accident. Reeves had fallen down the stairs after a night of heavy drinking. However, certain details didn't add up. Detective Lawson, now heading a task force on the Thompson case and its offshoots, arrived at the scene with growing suspicion. The position of Reeves' body didn't align with a typical fall. Also, while Reeves was a known social drinker, he wasn't known to drink excessively. A deeper forensic analysis found traces of a powerful sedative in his system, a medication not prescribed to him. As the investigation into Reeves' death progressed, a chilling theory emerged. Had someone silenced him to keep David's secrets hidden? The timing was suspicious. Reeves had been scheduled to provide more details to the police the following day. News of Reeves' death sent shockwaves through everyone involved in the investigation. People who had spoken to the police or were connected to David began to feel a creeping sense of danger. What had started as a sensational story of infidelity and fraud had now turned into something far more sinister. Sarah, already plagued by anxiety and depression after David's disappearance, found herself nearly paralyzed with fear. While she hadn't known Reeves well, the possibility that someone connected to the case had been killed terrified her. She installed a security system and rarely left her house. In Columbus, Jennifer faced her own fears. With 2 young children to protect, the thought that they could be in danger because of David haunted her. She considered moving away, starting fresh somewhere far from the investigation, but with the case still ongoing, that wasn't an option. As detectives dug deeper into Simon Reeves' death, they discovered that he had been quietly collecting his own information on David's illegal activity. His home office had been thoroughly searched before the police arrived, but the searchers had missed a hidden safe inside. They found documents that hinted David's fraud ran much deeper than previously thought, involving offshore accounts and possible links to organized crime. Simon Reeves' death marked a turning point. What began as a scandalous case of infidelity and financial fraud had now escalated into murder investigation, and as tensions mounted, it wouldn't be the last life lost in the tangled web David Thompson had spun. In the weeks following Reeves' death, a palpable sense of fear gripped everyone connected to the case. The police increased their presence around Jennifer's home, trying to reassure her and protect her children, but the fear was hard to shake. Anonymous threats began to surface. Sarah received phone calls late at night, with nothing but heavy breathing on the other end of the line. Jennifer discovered her car had been vandalized, with the word liar scratched into the paint. Even David's former boss received a grim package in the mail, a dead rat, a clear warning that the danger was far from over. The investigation into Emma Thompson's murder uncovered more disturbing details, but no definitive answers. Surveillance footage from Emma's apartment complex showed a figure entering the building late at night, but their face was obscured by a hood. Fingerprints found at the scene didn't match any known associates of Emma, and any potential leads fizzled out just as quickly as they appeared. Detective Lawson's team was growing increasingly frustrated. With Emma's death, it was clear that they weren't just dealing with a series of unfortunate accidents. Someone was systematically targeting people connected to David, but why? And more importantly, who was next? As the case continued, cracks began to widen, the pressure was wearing everyone down. Sarah, barely coping with the loss of her friend, found herself sinking deeper into depression. She had lost her job, unable to focus amid the chaos, and now felt more isolated than ever. Each night, she double-checked the locks on her doors and stared at the phone, wondering when the next call would come. The anonymous threats hadn't stopped. Jennifer, now living with her parents, was becoming increasingly paranoid. She no longer trusted anyone outside of her immediate family and had withdrawn from even her closest friends. Her children had started acting out, especially Jacob, who grew angrier with each passing day. And then there were the detectives themselves. Lawson's obsession with the case was starting to show. His relentless pursuit of every small lead was wearing on his team, causing friction. They were running out of ideas. But it was the discovery of Emma's personal journal that offered a breakthrough. Hidden in a compartment in her bedroom dresser, the journal chronicled Emma's growing fears about her brother's life and the dangerous secrets she believed he had been keeping. The entries revealed that Emma had uncovered some of David's financial fraud months before Sarah had, but she had stayed silent, hoping her brother would come clean. The final entries were chilling. Emma had written about a man following her, watching her from a distance. She described a series of strange phone calls, much like the ones Sarah had been receiving. Her final entry mentioned a meeting she had arranged with a former colleague of David's who had claimed to know more about David's offshore accounts. This revelation suggested that Emma had been closer to uncovering the full extent of David's criminal activities than anyone had realized. It also pointed to a larger conspiracy. The deeper they dug, the more convinced Detective Lawson became that this wasn't just about David's double life or financial fraud. Emma had stumbled onto something much bigger, possibly tied to organized crime or international money laundering. The offshore accounts hinted at connections that went far beyond David's immediate circle. But just as they were beginning to connect the dots, tragedy struck again. This time it wasn't a murder, but a missing person: Jennifer and her children. After weeks of hiding at her parents' home, Jennifer and the kids vanished without a trace. Her parents, frantic with worry, found their home ransacked. Just like Emma's apartment, no note, no calls, no explanation. The police feared the worst. With Jennifer and her children missing, Emma dead, and David still unaccounted for, the investigation reached a boiling point. Detective Lawson had no choice but to involve federal authorities, recognizing that whatever David had been involved in was far larger and more dangerous than they could have imagined. The case had started with secrets, lies, and betrayal, but now it had spiraled into something far darker: each death, disappearance, and clue pointed to a vast conspiracy, a shadowy network of corruption, violence, and deception that threatened to consume everyone touched by it. As Sarah sat alone in her house, paralyzed by grief and fear, she realized one chilling fact: whoever was behind these deaths wasn't finished yet. Emma had become an unlikely investigator, piecing together the fragments of David's hidden life. Her dossier grew with every disturbing discovery, fueled by a mix of disbelief, anger, and an unrelenting need to understand how her own brother had maintained such an elaborate facade. She had questions that needed answers, but those answers had come at a cost. Emma had found something big, something dangerous, and it had made her a target. The police discovered her apartment ransacked, her laptop missing, and her cloud storage wiped just hours before her death. Whoever had orchestrated this had gone to great lengths to make sure her findings were erased, as though she had uncovered a secret too dangerous to be left exposed. The deaths of both Simon Reeves and Emma Thompson sent ripples of shock through the police department, prompting federal involvement. The FBI arrived with Agent Carla Mendez, a seasoned investigator in high-stakes financial crimes, now collaborating with Detective Lawson to unravel the case. As Mendez delved deeper, the pattern became clear. This wasn't just about David's personal deception, but a vast network involving organized crime. The murders, the financial fraud, the accidents that were anything but David's double life seemed to have entangled him with forces far beyond what anyone had originally suspected. The man who had managed to lead two separate lives for so long was proving just as elusive in his disappearance. The break in the case came from an unlikely source. A hiker, wandering through a remote state park 50 miles from Millbrook, stumbled upon an abandoned cabin. Inside, it looked as though someone had been living there recently. The walls were plastered with newspaper clippings, detailing every development in the case. Spooked, the hiker alerted the authorities. When Detective Lawson and Agent Mendez arrived at the cabin, they immediately sensed its significance. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard, they uncovered a laptop, later confirmed to be Emma's. It was their first concrete lead in weeks. As forensic experts scoured the cabin for further clues, Sarah received a phone call that made her blood run cold. It was David. His voice was almost unrecognizable, hoarse, ragged, and heavy with desperation. He begged her for a meeting, claiming he could explain everything. Against her better judgment, Sarah agreed. Her desire for closure outweighed her fear. She alerted Detective Lawson, but knew that no amount of police presence could erase the vulnerability she felt. The chosen meeting spot was an abandoned factory on the outskirts of town, a decaying relic of a once booming industry. Sarah's heart raced as she stepped into the dilapidated structure. She knew the police were positioned around the perimeter, but it did little to ease the tension gnawing at her insides. When David finally emerged from the shadows, he barely resembled the man she once knew. His gaunt face, hollowed eyes, and disheveled appearance told a story of a man on the edge. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the air thick with the unspoken devastation between them. Then, David began to unravel his story. He confessed to his deep involvement with a criminal organization, revealing how it started with simple money laundering through his consulting job. What began as a thrill, a way to feel alive, had quickly spiraled out of control. The more money that flowed through his hands, the deeper he sank into a web of crime. He spoke of Jennifer and the children, his voice breaking as he described how he had truly loved them, how he had wanted to shield them from the criminal world he was entangled in, but it had been impossible. He had tried to keep them separate, to provide them with the kind of life he could never give Sarah. As David recounted the lies and regrets that had built up over the years, Sarah felt a tidal wave of emotions. There was anger at the destruction he had caused, pity for the man unraveling in front of her, and a bitter sadness for all the lives that had been shattered by his choices. But David's demeanor shifted suddenly, his eyes wide with paranoia as he spoke about Emma and Reeves, his voice cracking as he ranted about people coming for him, people who wouldn't stop until he was dead. Sarah, alarmed by his erratic behavior, tried to calm him. She urged him to turn himself in, to stop running from the nightmare he had created. But just then, the wail of sirens echoed through the air, signaling the arrival of the police. David panicked, pulling out a gun Sarah hadn't even realized he had. Her heart raced as she raised her hands, trying to reason with him. But David was past the point of reason. His eyes darted wildly as he ranted about how he couldn't face prison, how he would rather die than be locked away. What happened next unfolded in a matter of seconds, but would replay in slow motion in Sarah's nightmares for the rest of her life. The police stormed in, shouting for David to drop his weapon. David's face twisted in anguish, and before anyone could react, he turned the gun on himself. A single shot echoed through the factory as chaos erupted around them. David collapsed to the ground, his tragic double life brought to an end. The paramedics rushed in, but it was too late. In the aftermath, as Sarah stood frozen in shock, the final chapter of David Thompson's deceitful life had been written. His crimes, his lies, and his ruin had taken too many victims along the way. In the days that followed, the contents of Emma's laptop and the documents recovered from the cabin would lay bare the full extent of David's betrayal. His deep ties to organized crime, the deaths of Simon Reeves and Emma, the embezzlement, and the money laundering were all meticulously exposed. While David's attempt to take his own life had failed, leaving him in a coma, the law would never have the chance to hold him accountable. His fate now lay in the hands of doctors, leaving those affected by his actions to grapple with a sense of injustice. The criminal organization behind David's descent was dismantled, with key players arrested in a sweeping crackdown. But for Sarah, Jennifer, and the others left in the wake of David's destruction, the road to healing would be long and fraught with the scars of betrayal. In the days and weeks that followed, the full scale of David's crimes emerged. The laptop discovered in the cabin contained a trove of evidence, revealing a complex web of financial fraud, money laundering, and ties to organized crime that had been meticulously woven over the past decade. Although David survived his suicide attempt, he fell into a coma and would never stand trial for his actions. The thought that he would evade accountability for the pain he caused felt like an ultimate injustice. As investigations deepened, it became clear that both Reeves and Emma had been murdered not by David, but by members of the criminal organization he had tangled with, fearing their secrets would be exposed. With her life irrevocably changed, Sarah made the difficult decision to leave Millbrook. Meanwhile, Jennifer and her children remained in Ohio, striving to rebuild their lives far from the shadows of their past. First and foremost, we want to extend our heartfelt thanks to all of you who took the time to watch and support our recent video. If you're intrigued by real-life murder mysteries, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. What sentence would you have given David? Leave your thoughts in the comments, I'd love to read them. Remember to enjoy life and cherish the detective work that uncovers the truth.